My other phone is overheating, so we are here in the iPhone. Thankfully, I didn't lose much content. Please go check out the previous part to gauge your bearings. I don't know how many parts this message is going to be, but I'm doing it literally just to try and overcome the sorrow that I am in. South Africans are evil. I'm sorry, like maybe it's not all of them, whatever. But there is so much witchcraft in this country. It's literally through the roof. I get that there is calamity across the world all over the show. I get that the world at large is kind of uninhabitable, but nothing defeats a country that eats for breakfast, lunch, and dinner witchcraft in its uninhabitability. Allow me to use nations in the Bible to describe to you just how much more uninhabitable a country that is heavy into sorcery is, and the level of mourning that it causes on the ground for the people. So in the Old Testament, I stand corrected as to where, but it's there somewhere. There are descriptions, and also not only in the Old Testament, but also historical archives of people who wrote, historians, people who were scribes, that were recording the times as they were coming and going. There are ancient civilizations that also are mentioned in the Bible that used to put their children through the fire in order to gain favor from their demonic gods. One such people group were the Moabites, the people group that Ruth came from. And it should make sense that my story is very similar to Ruth, because Ruth eventually leaves her countrymen in favor of Naomi's people, and that is what got her blessed. The Lord knows how to extract people out of a crazy country. In Moab, they would literally impregnate women for the sole purpose of taking those children, raising them up to the age of 5 or 6, only to put them in a furnace. These kids are trained from this little age, from basically infancy, to take in their stride who it is that they are. They would be indoctrinated into believing that they are chosen and that their ultimate sacrifice will be burning for Chemosh. Their ultimate sacrifice would be giving their blood over to their God, because that means they're going to have an elevated person in eternity. So these kids didn't even complain. Some of them. Many did, because many were given by parents that were not even impregnated, by women that were just, they wanted to fix their lives. They were tired either of poverty or of being widows because husbands died and they didn't want to have to deal with the burden of these babies. And so they would hand their children over to the human sacrifice cult. These babies, these kids, the younger they were, the more apparently poignant and sweet the sacrifice to the demon god Chemosh they were. So sometimes they would burn crying infants fresh out of their mama's wombs. There were, however, batches of girls and boys that were raised to about the age of 6 or 7, just so they could walk through the fire. Now these kids are not being dragged or pushed in the fire. They are walking through it, meaning they've been trained to do this. They have been indoctrinated and also in and of themselves mind controlled, bewitched so much that in a trance-like state they just walk through the fire. So these people that keep on walking on coals, thinking that this is giving them some kind of strength or some kind of maturity, or in a meditative state they are reaching a higher level of spirituality. You are partaking in an ancient practice of that is satanic in its nature. Walking on coals without batting an eyelid, slowly, for a show, and then priding yourself on the fact that your feet are barely burnt. You are literally like giving of your body some kind of blood to a demon god. Anyway, let's go back to the story of Moab and their demon god Chemosh that Ruth belonged to the people of. Ruth of which was, thank God, married to a Hebrew man. Hebrew men was Ruth and Orpah or whatever married to, because Naomi had been made to move to Moab. But as soon as her husband died, and her kids, her sons died, she was like, what is the point? I'm going back home. And Ruth was like, your God will be my God, I'm following you. And so Ruth was blessed and became in the lineage of Jesus. But Orpah went back and remarried because she, in her tribe, in her people groups. The way that this demonic sacrifice was so extreme, because they knew that some of the children, even though they had been put in a trance as they are walking into the fire, that ultimately when they start to burn, things get real, they catch up with them, and so they start to scream. So what they did was to beat drums, miroba. They would beat drums to muffle out the sound of screeching, wailing, crying kids when they're burning to death. The kids of which were supposed to keep their cool all the way up until they died. Well, these parents who essentially aborted their babies in this horrific fashion are no different from women all over the world today that are partaking in abortions, and they're no different from men and women across the world today who are handing their sons and daughters over to vile practices. Just the abandonment of a daughter can make her a prostitute. The abandonment of a son can make him a gangster. They are putting their children through the fire. The abandonment of a kid can cause them to sin so vehemently against God with no avenue of escape, because they're doing anything at all to survive, that these kids will inevitably die without Jesus. It is indeed the Chemosh practice, or the Moabitic practice unto Chemosh, of putting your children through the fire. You raise them up to a certain age, and then you put them through such a rough life. You abandon and neglect them so horrifically that all they can do is steal to eat. All they can do is sleep with men to eat. All they can do is kill to eat. You put them in a Hunger Games arena. You are an irresponsible parent, and you make your son unable to take care of himself. And because he is a man, there is a whole underestimation and a shadowing of himself, or of his person as a man, because he doesn't have money. So he does anything to survive. Anything to impress girls, anything to impress his friends, anything to not be gazed upon as this namby-pamby floppy dude that has no money. So he becomes a drug lord. So he becomes a murderer. He becomes a car hijacker. They are thrown into crime by irresponsible parents who don't shield and protect them, as that is their responsibility. 1 Timothy 5:8, they are worse than an infidel because they don't provide for members of their own household. So you might not even abort your baby that is still in the womb, but by simply treating your daughter like she ain't jack, and ignoring her and abandoning her and throwing her to the dogs and letting all different kinds of grubby hands of men touch her, you on that day are worse than an infidel, and you are like a Moabite giving your child over to the god Chemosh. You are throwing your child into the eternal lake of fire. You are walking your child into the fire. You are deliberately casting your kid into eternal condemnation. It is written in the scriptures that it will be better for a person to have a millstone tied around their neck and be thrown into the ocean than for them to face God in the judgment, if at all they cause a child to sin. There are so many men and women across the world that have done this to their own kids. And the sad and uncomfortable thing is, because the guilty conscience is a whole thing that operates in a human being, when they feel bad, they compensate for how bad they feel by treating other children, even if it's not their own kids, better than those kids. So you're a wicked mom that has treated in your narcissistic personality your daughter like she ain't jack, thrown her to the dogs to be devoured by disgusting men. And then you go and you grab some other woman's daughter and you help her get a job. You go and you grab some other man's son and you help him get his life back together again. They overcompensate by loving on the periphery of them. But this is what it is that God has to say about them in 1 Timothy 5 verse 8. They're wasting time in trying to compensate for what they did to their biological children. They're wasting time by serving other people's needs, thinking that God is this God that gauges or that respects a scale. In that if you do more good deeds than bad, then you're good to enter heaven. That is a waste of time, because according to 1 Timothy 5 verse 8, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially immediate members of his household, your immediate daughter, your biological daughter, or your adoptive son and daughter, if you don't take care of these people that live in your household or that have been born from your womb, you are worse than an infidel. You've denied the faith. You are worse than an unbeliever. The Lord cannot for the life of him stand parents who put children in a position to compromise their lives and who make it hard for these kids to honor him, who make it hard for these kids to turn their lives over to him. I gave my life to Jesus in 2011, and my mom and dad, my family members, all of them, essentially said no. They made a decision that they are going to take me back to the world, that they are going to take me back to the darkness, that they're going to make me walk through the fire by abandoning me so badly that I very potentially might consider doing things that I would never have done prior to even coming to the faith. Like sleeping with a guy to get a job, like compromising myself in some way, lying on my CV, taking any kind of, like, extorting funds out of people, anything to get ahead. They are worse than infidels. Not only that, it'll be better for them to be thrown into the ocean following a millstone being tied around their neck than for them to face God on the judgment after doing this to me. They're worse than infidels. They're wasting time going to church. They are wasting time partaking in religious activity. They are wasting time because there was one among them. Even though they can help other people get jobs, they can go and grab cousins of complete strangers and give them interviews in their companies to try and compensate for what they've done. They're wasting time. For as long as I'm still in this position, all my family members are going to hell. All of them. For as long as I'm still suffering like this while my middle income family does whatever they want to do, they're going to hell in their numbers. If one drops to the ground, they will plunge into the abyss, even if they drop to the ground from a heart attack while in a church service. It doesn't matter, because according to God, they are worse even than somebody who does not believe. Next part.